I'm not sure people have heard of sound designers before, and if they have, they're probably on the same page I was before this, which is, oh yeah, they pick the music for a scene in a movie, and that's about it. Or maybe they add like a punching sound if the punch isn't loud enough in the stunt scene. But obviously, there's a lot more to it, and you're kind of part of this big magic trick where the audience isn't thinking about what they hear, but what they see, and you're maybe adding, if it were a drawing, you'd be shading it, right, with a pencil.
Right. Yeah. So, like, I think you're spot on, because I think a lot about sound design as a sleight of ear, because we're essentially putting up a smoke screen for what it actually sounds like. And so, what a sound designer actually does is just tons of like layers of stuff. And so, like, I do a lot of trailers and like big with big bois and bouges and things that just like want to get you totally hyped. But what I get is like raw dialogue from the set that sounds like it's, kind of far away and doesn't sound great. And then, we might have music and stuff, but there's just like a million sound effects, like categories and layers to every single piece of like video or film or television or ad that we do.
So when you look at two guys in they're like, all right, the trailer is they're climbing a mountain and it's really isolated and it's really snowy. It's just kind of muted, or maybe there's some ambient noise and they're like, yeah, you're going to have to get rid of that because all you hear is the microphone clipping from a lot of wind hitting it at the same time. Are you thinking in your head, okay, I'm going to whistle. We're going to make that whistling sound that's snow hitting snow on the top of a mountain makes?
Yes, because wind doesn't sound good at all. Wind, if we just take like a sample of wind, or like we go out and record wind, it usually, when you bring it in, it sounds like white noise. It sounds like
yeah.
So even you saying like top of a cold mountain, I'm like, that is like a fake wind. And I'm always telling, like, I lead a whole sound design team. So every time it's cold, I'm like, don't give me like the white noise wind. I need like the whistly, like performed wind that's like, and we kind of perceive it that way as humans. But like when you put a microphone somewhere, sometimes the microphone does not capture what your brain has interpreted. And
right,
our brain, over
like
the course of
that,
it just sounds like,
yeah.
And there's really no character or coldness to it. And so even like with every environment that we do, or Foley or something, it's all like performative. Like we're thinking a lot about like what's being said. Should it be like dissonant wind? Is something dissonant happening on screen? So we'll even like affect choices based off of the content of like what we're trying to make the viewer feel like.
I'm Googling dissonant because it sounds probably like what it is, but I'm not even sure what that means. What is that? Just lacking harmony is what that technically means. But what does that mean when I'm looking at an image?
Right. So like, we can make, or like as sound designers, we can make like wind or environments or walla is just people talking and stuff. We can choose and craft these sounds and mold them to be have a character of their own. And so what I mean by that is like wind itself might seem really straightforward. And if you just put a microphone out in the wind, like I said, it's just, but you can have that, the speed at which it's whistling can be the flow of the edit. Like the speed, like the dissonance that you create within that. Maybe it's like hitting something that has like two kind of off pitches that are kind of clashing if we want to make someone start to feel tense along the way.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so like we're always, it's like sound design is very much like composing the real world in a lot of ways. But when we've also have this rich cinema history that has kind of taught us what these things sound like as well, which are not really real.
Yeah, it programs our brain with what we expect to hear. I know it's funny you mentioned the tension thing, because one thing I was thinking of was I think it was Free Solo, or maybe it was another movie that I saw where somebody was climbing. And there's a scene where it might have even been like Mission Impossible with those fake rock climbing scenes with Tom Cruise. But there's one, he's hanging with one hand. And I noticed the wind got higher pitched, which means faster. I'm like, oh, so the wind just happens to kick up even faster when he's hanging by one hand. And I thought, oh, no, they're trying to get us to feel like he's off balance and that things are happening rapidly. So they just speed the wind up. In reality, there's probably no wind on this area at all, because his clothes aren't even really moving or anything. He's just
Yeah, it's
hanging.
like a magician. I actually love magic. I've gone to so many magic shows, but like what a magician is doing is something that looks so eloquent and clean in front of you, but there's all this dirty work that happens like just in the shadow. Like you can't see it and everything looks really fluid. Everything makes sense, but like right underneath the surface, there's a lot of like just work happening just to craft like every microsecond. And that's sound design essentially.
Yeah, I guess if people want to compare, watch a small indie film that has a scene and then watch a very similar scene in a Hollywood blockbuster. And the sound, the lighting is a major thing, of course, but the sound is also really, really obvious because it just, you sound like you're in the person's shoe when they're walking on gravel in the Hollywood one, whereas you just don't hear it at all, probably in the indie film because they're
It's
just
very
walking.
boring.
Yeah.
For the most part. Like when because a lot of times we'll receive scenes or a collection of scenes and just hearing what's on set is pretty boring. But then there's like these other categories of sound design that like are much more overt. So, we talked a little about like environments, but there are these kind of funny sounds that they're kind of funny to me because they're so overtly trying to like affect you. So I'm thinking things like in a trailer where you hear like a blah, where it's like, "Brrr," uh, you, are we ever gonna get there? Brrr.
Right.
Maybe. And then some
Yeah.
like line
It's
that's
funny.
like, you know, a little piece of what's gonna happen in the movie, followed by like a whole reimagined 80s track in a new way that's kind of spooky. It's like the building blocks of a trailer. And
That's
so
funny.
like
It's like,
hits and shimmers and shings and those things are used just so liberally in advertising just to like reach into your like primal brain
yeah.
and try to like pull on that fear response.
Yeah, it's funny. You're obviously really good at this because as you describe that, I'm like, okay, character standing on a in an open plain, dystopian skyline in the distance. Flash to like split second of an action scene where an alien is like reaching out towards them later on in the movie. Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And there's drum beats and that loud like foghorn that's not quite a foghorn thing, which just sounds like
the blah. Uh-huh.
yeah, and it's so it is funny because it's almost predictably cliche, and yet if you find a trailer that doesn't have that, y'all didn't do your job, right? In,
Right.
in this
Yeah.
decade, anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Until
Yeah.
we get sick of that, because everyone uses it, and then you have to find something else.
But there's a good reason for it. And this is what's so fascinating just kind of about sound design to me is like a lot of this stuff may seem like it's just like, oh, that's a scary sound, let's put it in. But a lot of this stuff is like very much psychological. It's playing off of our primal urges and feelings. Like we're living in like the future right now. This is our ancestors would see this like we're living like legit in the
Yeah, I'm
future.
looking at you on a screen. I'm talking to you like you're right across from me with almost no latency. It's amazing.
Right. Now, even a couple generations ago, the lifestyle for all of human history before that was a lot different. Hunter, gatherer, basic needs, things like that. So, like when we put in these hits, like our brains are still pretty, living in 1,000 years ago. Like, we're getting there, but like there's so many things in the way that we do things that just our brains aren't prepared for. Anxiety situations, public speaking, things like that. In sound, that's a thing that you can kinda play off of. If you're in a creaky old house and you hear one little twig break or something in the middle of the night, like, your brain goes straight to, "There is a robber, and I'm in
Hmm.
trouble." Meanwhile, it was just like, your house settling or something like that. So, like, a lot of those, like, sounds are really just trying to, like, hit you in those places that are kind of the primitive brain, to make you feel, these early responses, that they would naturally have. And so it is very much like a magic trick mixed with, like, neuroscience.
Yeah, it's you've found switches in people's brains, and then you flip them with these sounds, or you push these little buttons that I guess are they've got to be kind of tricky to find. How do you come up with the wah sound? Right? Is that just a
Yeah.
trial and error?
Usually you make them. There's gonna be, luckily we have Hans Zimmer who just beautifully bwah'd everything for, a decade. And so we have kind of these just epic sounds here that we hear, but we can't just take Hans Zimmer. So then you have that's the challenge to all these sound designers and composers to go, can I make something that's like just as epic that can still affect people that way? Now, I argue that like we've gone so far in the epic direction, especially with like superhero movies and things like that, that it's like becoming a super cliche thing.
Yeah.
Like, even if we rewind a decade or 2 ago, do you remember when trailers were just like, Jack met, Julie in the coffee shop,
Yeah,
and
it's
there's a
just
little
stuff
bite.
that happens in the movie that's cut
It's just stuff
together.
that happens
Yeah.
cut together with a narrator.
Yeah.
And now it's like now we've hit this, like, the 2010 plus cliche I think people are getting a little tired of, which is just like the overly epic everything rather than like kind of crafting a mini story or whatnot. But you know what? It's marketing. There's a lot of money involved. We're trying to get, you know, $500 million out of a movie. Like, they're going to probably throw everything they can at it
Yeah,
to
it
be
has to leave you.
massively
I mean,
epic.
I remember before these trailers were so commonplace, you'd watch a trailer like that and it would leave you going, "Whoa, I cannot wait to see that." And now it's just like, "Oh, it's a movie trailer." Right? So, but you have to constantly evolve these things, and sound is a big part of that. Do you find that your curation of sound, because I assume you're not just making trailers, you probably have like a nice acoustic environment in your house that's not that noisy, and all this other elements of your sound design coming into your real life we can talk about in a second. But I wonder if it extends to other elements of your personality. Like, are you a foodie? Do you try and design your
Oh
food
my
too?
goodness. That's very sharp to think about. Yeah, like because I think so much about it, the sense of hearing, which is a sense that a lot of people don't think much about. I do think a lot about just like sensory things in general. I do parallel just personal life. I am just obsessed with fine dining, new flavors, and cooking myself. So it's
Hmm.
it's really similar. But yeah, like just stimulating a sense in a brand new way is definitely something that I'm pretty addicted to. I mean, I do that all day long with hearing.
Yeah.
Food is another place where I spend way too much time
Yeah, it's like
focused
the
on.
most obvious kind of, well, if I'm going to listen to sounds all day, I'm going to also do stuff with tastes when I don't have to do it for money. You also seem like the kind of guy who opens a bag of noodles and goes, "Whoa, listen to this bag. I should keep this bag. I might need this bag for later. Listen to that sound the bag
You know
makes."
what
Are you that guy?
most like when we are doing footsteps on grass,
Uh-huh.
most of the time, that like the little like yellow sweeper. It looks like it's almost like hay. That it's just the real standard like
Like a
broom. Like if
broom?
you look at the
Yeah.
most classic broom you could imagine, and it has those like I don't know hay looking. I'm sure that there's a name for that.
Yeah, straw, the dry
Most
straw broom from the
Yeah, it's just
60s or
dry straw
whatever.
broom. So what we do most of the time when we're just putting in footsteps that are on foliage or grass or whatever, we're just crunching that as we're watching the screen. Just because it
With
sounds
your
so
hands.
much more distinct. Yeah.
Wow.
And a lot of times even in Foley, like especially with animation and stuff, actually with dirt, a lot of Foley studios will just have like a little dirt pit where I've seen them manipulate just little tiny bits of dirt with their fingers because it sounds more crisp and clear. Not all the time, and also dirt is dirty, so like you don't want to just start stomping around in a room and kicking up dust.
Right.
Yeah.
Full of electronics. Yeah, for people who don't know what Foley is, this is something that, well, how do you even explain this? I've seen it in studios. I'll rent a studio and I'll go, "Why do you have gravel in a small kitty litter sandbox looking thing?" And they'll go, "Oh, we do Foley here too." And it's just making a sound that is supposed to be like footsteps hitting the ground, like you just mentioned with dirt, except you have to do it into a really high quality microphone. And like you said, you don't want to just start making a huge mess in a room with a $30,000 soundboard. You have to have it sort of localized.
Yeah, I think that the confusion with Foley is like, why don't you just go to a library, find footsteps, and then kind of sync them in there? Foley's job is to be a very performative art because if you just kind of put in stock footsteps, even the way we walk can vary greatly. Like if you're mad, like if you're mad at your partner or something, you want to stomp away. That's a different performance of a stomp than I don't know, someone just you haven't seen in a long time arrives at your front door and you're like, oh my goodness. So Foley is essentially the sound elements that a human in the piece is touching, whether it's with their hands, it could be their clothing, and it could be their feet, generally. Now, Foley will kind of veer into more unique sounds and stuff because they have giant rooms of junk. But for the most part, like the core aspect of Foley is done by humans in front of a screen in real time because what they're trying to do is all of those intangible moments they're trying to perform for the actor. It's like an extension of what the actor is doing. So if you have bad Foley, it can actually take away from the performance of the actor.
Yeah, this makes sense. It's kind of like when, like, if I brush my shirt off, it makes a little sound, but if you're going to do Foley of that, it's going to be like you're a microorganism that's between my hand and the shirt in terms of volume. It's like, You know, especially if it's in slow motion. It's like, and each footprint, if even if I'm running through a forest, it's almost like there's a microphone on the sole of my shoe that's mic'd up. Now, it wouldn't actually make
That's
that
exactly
sound. It
right.
makes the sound that you make in your head when you think that, but
So
not
the
the
cool
actual
thing
sound.
so on set, in any, production set, the only thing that matters is the dialogue, especially when you're working with celebrities, because if you're gonna try to get them back into a room to overdub it or do ADR on top of it, that's where they re-record their dialogue on top of the screen, which many, people do not like doing. So that's where, if, say, it's too windy on set and they're outside, these actors have to then go into a really highly polished studio, and then they have to watch their performance and re-record the dialogue on top of
Mm.
it. For example, like the Lord of the Rings films, I've heard that 98% of all the dialogue was recorded in a studio. Everything you see on camera was not used other than like 2%. So the reason that and this is kind of like an American style in general, but the reason that everything is so crisp and clean in Foley is exactly what you just said. The difference, when you're on set, it's just that they're just trying to capture the voice because that is just the gold. Because an actor wants to really put everything into their performance there, and the sound person's responsibility is that voice, that performance. And so that microphone is not pointing at their feet. The microphone's not pointing at their shoulder. It's not pointing at what they're touching. It's pointing right at their mouth. And that stuff doesn't matter because all of that stuff can be reperformed. And when it's reperformed in Foley, you're right. Every single body part that's being reflected in the piece, the microphone could be inches away from it. So everything is just really crisp and clean. And that's why like movies and high quality TV shows, just like the sound is like so visceral. And it's just, you imagine every single thing making a sound has a microphone that's just like inches away from it. And it's just super clean.
I know that from watching a ton of TV as a kid, right? Your brain makes this picture, this sound picture of what things should sound like. And as an adult, let's say I'm cleaning a windshield and it doesn't make that squeaky sound that you expect a windshield to make, I'm like, am I doing this
Keep
wrong?
going.
Am I not? Yeah. Where's the
not right.
sound that a squeegee makes when it touches glass? And it's like, that's not real, man. That's made up by a Foley artist.
It's quite a bit different. But then on the flip side, it's amazing what we can hear in real life that it's just a lot more visceral than hearing it through like fakeness and speakers and things. And so that's part of like a thing that I think a lot about is like getting people more conscious about their sense of hearing. Because when you become more conscious about it, it can be really visceral. It's like if you listen to like a wonderful like a track of music that just really inspires you or something that makes you feel amazing. You are active listening in that moment. You're really just you're opening up this sense. You're letting it absorb into your brain. But I argue that you can do that with just sound in general, like the sound of your friend's laughter, like just really appreciating that like beauty in that, and just real vibrations in the real air. Going from a real thing to your real ears is a really powerful sense.
Is that like when people say, "Oh, the analog sounds better than digital"? Is that kind of the same argument?
It's funny that I have kind of a controversial opinion on that. I am not really in the camp that analog sounds better than digital, but what I will concede is that the way that we approached music in the analog era was much more active than how we approach music in the digital era. And what I mean by that is like, whether you had a cassette tape or a record, you had to like dig through bins to find something that you may or may not even be able to listen to. You look at the artwork, you go to a Tower Record, you spend 30 minutes getting there, you go through it, you pull it out, you go buy it. Like you're invested in listening to this. You have like skin in the game for this thing. You put real money down here and you've spent time. So then you
Yeah.
go back. So then when you put this record on, like you're like training your body and mind to like think about it and engage with it. Same thing with a cassette tape. You only had so many of them. Like I wasn't rich. I could only have, a few of them. And some of them I didn't even like, but I would listen to it because that's all I had. The thing that we lost in the transition from analog to digital is that approach because now it's like everything is so disposable. If I don't like something in 2 seconds, I can skip. If I don't like something, so it's like the programmatic album, like the art of it is just so easily lost. And so we get like a big series of big singles and music that's now being made for that style of just like, you know, almost clickbaity type. I mean, there's still amazing music being made, but I think that's the thing that like bums me out the most is that we just don't approach even listening to music with the same level of skin in the game as we did when there were analog mediums. So I wouldn't really say they sound better or worse. I just think that our minds were more conscious about listening. Therefore, that's a big reason why I think analog sounds better, because we're more primed for it.
Interesting. Yeah, might even be. I won't go down the evolutionary path here, but yeah, might be, like you said, more primed for it. I think is a great way to phrase it. Sonic branding is interesting, right? We can still, people maybe don't even know this exists, but the second I give you an example, the Intel Inside sound, right? When you see those commercials. Yeah, we'll play that sample right now, Jace. I got the samples linked for Jace in the show notes here, or in my notes. My producer will play this. Everybody knows what that sound is. And if they were like, wait, what was that? I think I've heard of that. The second they hear it, they're looking at the logo in their head. And so this is a brilliant play, because you can evoke a branded logo or animation in someone's head with a sound, even if there's no screen anywhere near you. And what else is going on with sonic branding? That can't be the only reason they do this.
When Netflix like leaned into that and made a sonic brand that was there all the time, I felt like that was a moment in history where it really started to explode. Like many more companies started going, what's the reasoning for this? We have, we're very visual creatures in general. So like a logo seems to make a lot of sense. Artwork makes a lot of sense. With sound, we just don't think about it a lot. So we don't go, what does it matter? Like what something sounds like. But you kind of think of like this, thinking of like the Office episode where like Dwight keeps getting like Altoids or something every time he does something. It's like this Pavlov's dog thing. It's like you can make a sound or do something that recalls a feeling. It's like if you walk into like your grandmother's house and you smell that dish that she makes, or that baking that only she did, that just washes you with nostalgia and good feelings. So when you think of something like, Netflix, which I kind of considered the most iconic sonic branding out there, that is it's a call to action that says, you're done, put your phone down. You're about to watch something incredible. Your brain unconsciously is thinking about this because hopefully you're watching stuff that has a consistency of entertaining you. And if you have that positive association, then that sound is essentially training you to go, it's time to stop with all those other things. Listen up.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Netflix sound, the Da-Dum, or whatever it's called. You did an episode on this, and we'll link to that in the show notes to your podcast. The ingredients of this are really interesting. I don't understand for the life of me how people come up with the idea on how to make a sound, but that's why you guys do what you do, because it's not something that that anybody can just pick up and do randomly. It just seems like, for those of us that have ever looked into getting a sonic branding, like I would love to do that for this show. And I thought, that's probably going to be like several $100s, but it's worth it. And I got a quote and they were like, I was like, this is more than the house that I grew up in.
Right.
And they're like, you don't understand. Here's the process. It's going to take months for us to come up with the values
easily
of your company and what you do. And we're going to have to listen to possibly hundreds of hours of things that you've created in order to embody you and your show and you as a creator in like a 2 or 3 second long sound. And we have to try zillions of different things in order to get that. There's going to be guys and gals sitting in a room banging on cars and plastic bits and instruments until they get a feeling for what this means, and it's got to be translated. It's like translating a book, War and Peace, into Klingon. Like someone's got to sit there and do that. And that's what happens with these sounds.
That's what's really surprising, is because I do a lot of sonic branding and I study it and I make shows about sounds. But I think there is this assumption that like a sonic brand is a cool sound. That is just the opposite. I would say that the thing that takes us the longest out of everything we do is sonic branding. The shorter the sound, the longer it takes. And this thing can take months. And the reason it takes months is because every one of these sonic brands means something deeply. That's one of the reasons I started the podcast, is because there are these incredibly nuanced stories behind why things sound the way that they do that are just going to be lost to history. And so sonic branding is something that if I'm getting into a situation with sonic branding, it is a long process of strategy. I need to understand what a company believes, where they're going. I don't need to work with someone who's like an assistant to the marketing, assistant. I need to work with the CMO or the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard to get because you don't want to be in a situation where you're representing an entire company either visually or sonically, and you don't have the ear of the person who has their finger on the pulse of everything. So that is hard in and of itself. Otherwise, you find yourself in a situation where you're going through people and then you start designing by committee, and then it turns into just a sound that they just never use.
Yeah, it's just a
So
crappy jingle at that point.
it's just a thing. It just doesn't
Yeah.
mean anything. And so that's what's really interesting about sonic branding, is that it all needs to mean something. Hopefully these stories help the company understand themselves better when they do this. I found out that many of these companies that or many of these sonic logos that we've profiled in the past, that most of them have adopted that internally into their marketing training to have people understand why things are the way that they are. That's what I find so interesting about sonic branding, is in generally, is just because it can teach you what people believe when you unpack it. And you can go into certain periods of time and go, okay, this was made in 1992, and you can understand why they were thinking the way that they were. Did they achieve it or not? But yeah, it's a very long strategy process. I would say that it's 95% strategy and 5% creation most of the time.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I mean, in the Netflix episode of your show, they sent out a survey to a bunch of people with all these different sounds. They didn't tell them what it was for. Like, what 5 words does this evoke? And somehow the Da-Dum sound evoked the word movie, which was just almost like a coincidence, but shows that whoever invented that or came up with that had really nailed it, because they didn't say this is for Netflix. They just said, what does this sound remind you of, or whatever. And a bunch of people said movie. So it's
And this
like,
was after probably a year process of going through countless. I mean, I
Yeah.
legitimately, I don't even think it's possible to like know exactly what ballpark it was in, because there's just so much experimentation. But by the time it even hits that, this is a year. I believe they said it was like a year of just trying different things, like bubbles coming out of the earth, and some sideways thing over here and some sideways thing over there, and they were putting it with their logo and all that stuff. And what was interesting about that particular thing is when it was actually the first time that the company had ever spoken on it. So I was speaking with Todd Yellen, who led the effort at Netflix. So the thing he didn't even get when I talked to him about it, and it never really registered, is he said, I really wanted this thing to evoke, aha, it's Netflix. And when I heard that in the interview, I went, that's the logo. Do you notice that? Like, and he didn't even kind of register that, because I think I even brought that up after we were done recording. I said, did you realize that you said that, like, in the brief when you started this, you said you wanted it to evoke, aha, it's Netflix. And I was like, that's legitimately the exact same thing that's happening here. Da-dum, by the end of this. And so so they were exploring all these different options. He loved that. Kind of going back to what you were saying with the movie, and when they were kind of putting this in front of audiences and stuff. There was another option that I found hilarious, is that they wanted to kind of evoke the old Leo the Lion idea. Like MGM, there's a lion in the middle of it, and it just goes. So they wanted this to feel like a big cinematic moment. So they thought a lot about animals being a part of it, or having some sort of call and response in there. And so the thing that I learned out of that logo that just kind of blew my mind is, he said there was almost a goat bleat in that sound. And I was like, I don't believe you. And he was like, you can hear it. Don't play it in your podcast, because this is like pretty deep stuff.
Like, this is Netflix.
It
like
was
the
legitimately
the Affleck goose.
The PR person played it straight off of their phone. They said, no joke, this is exactly what we were doing. And it sounded exactly like the Netflix logo. It was just like this. It went, ah. No joke. We legitimately, even like in the show with him saying, thank God I did not use the goat sound.
Oh, man. Can you imagine spending, how much do you think it cost to develop the final Netflix sound? And then imagine spending that amount on a goat.
I think it's like, I don't even know how much it would cost, but you got to realize, like, the assets of these things, what they turn into, the value. It's like the McDonald's, the marketing people have been quoted as saying that's $1 billion asset.
Wow.
Because they've been using it for over 2 decades.
Really? I remember McDonald's used to change their I guess sonic branding, but a lot of their slogan or whatever, because it used to be like food, folks, and fun. And I remember going, this isn't really landing for me. My best friend and I as a kid, I'm still friends with him. Now he's a prop designer in Hollywood. He's like, I don't like this one. And I'm like, I don't know why I have an opinion, but I agree with you. I'm like 12 years old critiquing McDonald's new branding campaign. But I remember thinking food, folks, and fun doesn't really land for me. And before that, I can't remember what it was. I think it was a good time for the great taste of McDonald's. And the fact that I remember that means they invested well in that branding.
That was a good
also
one. And we played both of those on there. But food, folks, and fun was kind of a dud.
It wasn't?
Okay. So what they were trying to fix with the da 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 is at this point in their in McDonald's, I think it was like early 2000s. That's when they were exploding around the world. So they had a problem. They had every single market doing with their own ad agencies defining what McDonald's is independently. And so what they
Oh
were trying to
man.
solve is they needed to have some sort of short jingle, some sort of sonic logo that can be adapted, but it's still a holistic, focus of what McDonald's is, whether you're, in Japan or in Arkansas. And so that was the challenge. And it was a German ad agency that put this thing together. They had to make like a jingle that would could be malleable. So like da 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 da, it could be hip hop, it could be on a zither, it could be on anything. Like you can turn that into a country thing, you can turn it into whatever you want it to be, but the core I'm loving it da 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 is always there. Um, not in every single thing, but at least that's kind of what the quintessential McDonald's message is. And so they've stuck with it 2 decades, and I was shocked to find out that it's been that long.
Yeah, that
And
is
there's
a
lots
long
of
time.
controversy on who wrote it, and
Yeah, there's one might say there's beef surrounding it.
yeah,
Or one might say that it's the realest beef McDonald's is actually involved with. All right, I'm done.
it's a pretty fun one.
Yeah. Yeah, they had Justin Timberlake in there, and now I remember there was a piece on him kind of thinking he got the raw end of the deal because it's $1 billion asset. And it's like, well, I don't know if you made it's like the person who drew the swoosh saying, I only got a few $100s for this. I mean,
Well, he
yeah.
also did not write it, and what's so funny
Yeah.
about the Justin Timberlake aspect is because he was like, I think he was like in the the launch spot or something. But he did before this was even announced. He did a "I'm Loving It" tour before McDonald's even announced that it was going to be part of their branding. So he had
Oh,
that "I'm
wow.
Loving It" song. Like there's this like song that Justin Timberlake does that's called "I'm Loving It," and he does the like "I'm loving it," and it's a bunch of dancing people and whatnot. I'm loving it. But like then that ended up turning into the McDonald's thing. But I find it so funny that like there was like this corporate thing that was being seeded by Justin Timberlake in the I'm Loving It tour
Mhm.
before it even happened. I think it's kind of brilliant, but he didn't write it.
Yeah.
He maybe had some hand in that, but as far as the actual jingle and the strategy, that was a couple of people at an agency, music agency over in Germany.
I feel like he was probably compensated quite handsomely for it. And honestly,
Yes, I'm sure he's
it
in the right.
only enhanced his brand, the fact that they were able to play this thing and that you still hear it occasionally and you maybe associate it with him. I feel like he was able to make a living off of that, and if not, then it didn't
He
hurt
pulled
him,
himself up
certainly.
from the bootstraps after
Yes.
that and made
Yes.
something of himself.
Exactly. Yeah, he's not exactly destitute after the McDonald's campaign. Let's talk about sonic branding when it comes to stuff around the house. I was doing laundry yesterday. I have an
Oh,
LG washer, and it
da,
makes
da,
me
da,
feel
da,
like I'm.
da, da.
Yeah, yeah, you know
Is
it.
that the one?
Okay, yeah, that's the one. And my wife can do it. I can do it. Our auntie that helps take care of the kids I'll catch her kind of humming it, and
Uh-huh.
my mother-in-law can do it. I've got a 2.5-year-old kid, and he can't do it exactly right every time, but even he will start to do it or after it goes off, he'll repeat it. And so that means it's really working at kind of a primal level because this is a kid who he barely speaks in complete sentences most of the time. All right, he's 2.5 years
Right.
old,
Yeah.
and so and he speaks 2 languages, so it's already a little delay there. But yet this LG washer thing, he's almost got it nailed. When did
Yeah,
that
I could
happen?
sing the whole thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, easily.
That's
Because when I was a
relatively
kid,
new.
the
Yeah.
washer went "Beep" when I was done.
Yeah.
When it was done, that was it. That was
It was
it.
just like what that's communicating is just like, I don't care, just come get it. Whatever. But yeah, the dun da da
Yeah,
da 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 da. To me, that's like the most Japanese thing that we know in America. Like
that may be the case. Yeah, our
it's
toilet
so
doesn't
pleasant.
yet sing.
It's kind of why I'm jealous of the Japanese in general because they're so forward thinking on like sound things. It's like even in their metro, they have different jingles for every stop. I mean, come on. That's amazing. Um, so that's great. But yeah, the appliance sound design is something that's becoming more and more popular. Um, again, trying to associate positive, thoughts with these things that are generally not positive. UI sounds on these things. For me, when I hear that, I just think, oh god, I gotta fold the laundry. Like
That's
that
where
doesn't.
yeah. It means
Yeah, it's not
oh
like
god,
it's
I can't just
done.
leave it in there.
if you had that jingle after it auto-folded it, it would be the best jingle in the world. It would be the most
Right.
famous jingle in all of history.
Yeah. Come put on some warm underwear. Now it's just, hey, you
Oh,
better
it'd be
fold
amazing.
this before everything gets cold and wrinkly.
Exactly, and all wrinkly.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. All wrinkly. NBC has a chime that I grew up with that I still can do, even though I haven't watched TV in decades, other than, cord cutting stuff on the internet. That type of thing seems like, did they pioneer sonic branding television stations, or was it, or sorry, radio stations, and then eventually made it to television? Where did
What's
the whole thing
amazing
start?
So what's amazing about that, so I was a sound mixer in Burbank at the NBC studios, so I would walk by this giant mural that would talk about the chimes, like, every day. I never really thought about it. So it kind of told that story, but what's interesting about the "dong, dong, dong" it
Hmm.
wasn't perfect. You might have to auto-tune that.
Yeah, we'll play the sample.
Joking.
Well, auto-tune,
The
yeah, auto-tune it.
But, that was not like, "We need a sonic brand job in 1932," or something. What it was is it was solving a radio problem. So, now we don't have to deal with this, but back in the day of analog, when they were gonna go from the news here to the radio drama here, they had to have someone physically pull a patch cord out and put it in somewhere else. And we all know what that sounds like.
Yeah.
We don't do it with our headphones on because it hurts our ears. But they needed something to cover that. So basically they have, an announcer saying, "This is WNBC." And then literally back then it was an announcer going dong dong dong. So they would cut to them, there'd be like a patch cable change. And then it's kind of a seamless transition. And so at first it was like 7 notes. I can't even remember what all the notes were, but it was too complex, and then they kind of shortened it down to 3 that we know now. And also, even back then, they used it to notify affiliate stations of breaking news coming in, and what they call the 4th chime, where it'd go dong 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 dong, and then like everyone would go on alert. Like when D-Day happened, they did that.
Oh, so it's
So
like
yeah, it was kind of
there's war news
solving.
or actually important breaking news, not the stuff we have today where it's like breaking news. Here's a photo essay
Yeah,
from East
exactly.
Germany.
Some celebrity did a thing,
Yeah.
breaking news.
Kim
But back then,
Kardashian
like
broke up.
breaking news, yeah.
Yeah, Kim
So it's
Kardashian
kind of
broke
like
up
the
with Pete
signal.
Davidson.
Right, exactly. So yeah, kind of just like there was a very pragmatic use for that sound. And then because it just continually was used, and then this is now a positive association with people, it just kept going. So I'm a big fan of like, when you make something great, do not let it go. Like NBC, if they tried to get a new hot shot like sonic brand, it would be a colossal failure. Like, you have something that's like nearly 100 years old that people associate, like, it is valuable. Lean into it more. And they have, and they've done that.
Yeah, they'll put a little modern. You hear it occasionally with like a plug-in or something where they run it through, or they use a different instrument. But even
Make a
then,
hit
in your head,
version.
you're almost hearing the original. At least I
Right.
am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little xylophone. Dong dong dong. Yep.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show. What's going on then with some of there's new online issues, or I should say internet age issues with sound. And misophonia is a disorder that I had just recently heard of. Somebody wrote into our advice inbox, Feedback Friday inbox about this. And when I tell friends about it, at least one in a group of 10 will go, "Oh, I think I have that. I have that. When this and this and this happens, I get really agitated and I start to get really annoyed." And it's like I guess misophonia would be considered a very adverse reaction, or just a generally adverse reaction to certain sounds. And there's a scale where it's sort of, hey, that's a mildly annoying thing. Stop doing that. Or I should move away from that. And then at the end of the scale, it's uncontrolled rage at a certain sound. And most people don't have that end of the scale, but certain people with neurological disorders, or like sometimes autism and things like that, they can have a completely violent reaction.
Even bad associations, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so misophonia is interesting. The thing that I've found, we're like 150 episodes into the show, and we do a lot of science shows and concept shows. And the thing that I've learned, because I feel like I'm on the front line of this, is just how more there is to do in research with sound. Like, I think that, like, with our other senses, we're just a little bit more conscious about it. So I think we think more in general, and we study it more. With sound, like I've found the bleeding edge of what we don't know. And misophonia is one of those things. It is very, even with the most expert guests, it is very hard there's very little grasp on exactly what's happening there. But what essentially misophonia is exactly what you said. It's like a physical, like overwhelming hatred for a certain type of sound. So for people who are not misophonic, think about like, I wouldn't consider myself one, but there are certain like textures if I rub my nails on or
Yes.
something, or like if you take like a fork and you do your teeth and you pull the food off with your
Oh,
teeth,
yeah.
like those things like will
Nails on
really
a
get
chalkboard
me.
is the cliche one.
The
Right.
nails on the chalkboard. But imagine that with a lot more things. And I believe, and this is completely speculation, I'm not a scientist, but I think that that's part of an overall sensory issue. I believe that like the way that we all perceive the world is different. The way that we hear the world is different. The way that we feel the world is different because it's all interpreted by our brains. But I found I've asked people, like, sometimes someone who might have a very, like, over the top reaction to certain sounds might also have very over the top reactions to very, overt spices and things like that.
Hmm.
So, like, I think that there's a lot of work to be done in, like, sensory studies, like, because I think that there's a very big spectrum of how we all experience our senses. And I think to assume that everyone experiences the senses in exactly your way is tough. And misophonia is one of those that I think it's just helpful to just be aware that just because a sound doesn't bother you, doesn't mean that it can just trigger really nasty stuff for other people. And there's a lot of people with it. I know right now there's a lot of people saying, I think I have that.
Yes.
Because every time I bring it up, it's always just like, oh my, it's you just like explained a thing that I've never thought before, but it's legitimate.
Right. Yeah. There's people who say there's this guy in my office who's perfectly nice. We're actually kind of friends, but he does this thing with his foot or with his finger, and it's driving me absolutely insane. It's like Chinese water torture. And they'll put headphones on, and it kind of doesn't help because their ear is almost listening through the headphones for this particular thing. And they have to
Mm.
also not see it because when they see it, they can kind of hear it, even though they can't really hear it. And it's driving them crazy. And for me, ASMR, which is like well, I'll let you explain what it is, but this triggers my misophonia and it makes me want to, I'm not even exaggerating, I've never done this, of course, but it makes me want to pick up my laptop and smash it onto the floor until it explodes when one of those videos comes on YouTube because it's the whispering and the lip smacking, and it just makes me physically almost like violent slash ill at the same time. I hate it. I
What it
hate
does
it.
for me is it gives me very pleasant tingles all the way down, like, my spine. I can trigger ASMR response. So to explain what ASMR, I think it's like, um
Autonomous sensory meridian response.
there you go. Yeah, so what's happening, so there's this concept of synesthesia. So this is a really fascinating topic, and we've covered that before, and it's like crossover senses, like senses that start to smear together. And what we're doing with, someone who might hear something, but perceive it as a color. Like I've worked with sound designers who go, "This sound here is very purple to me," and a lot of people, I've come across a lot of people who do that. ASMR is like a hearing touch synesthesia. So this is an example, and I'm getting it right now just talking about it. It's an example of like something happening in hearing that's crossing over into some weird part of our brain that's now becoming touch. And so for me, what happens with these really tiny sounds, and there's a lot of arguments of why these sounds work, and a lot of people say it's because like how you were talked to gently as a baby or things like that. But these really quiet sounds, really gentle sounds, and I'm not even getting close to what they do. It's a lot of like whispering.
I can't listen to it because again, I will smash the computer. It
But what
creates
I
an itch in
feel
my brain that I can't scratch. That's the best way for me to phrase it. It's an
for me,
uncomfortable itch.
it's all external though. Like
Oof.
it triggers somewhere like where my shoulders meet my spine, and it just like it gives me like almost like goosebumps, but on it, not real goosebumps, but it just tingles all the way up the back of my head, kind of down my shoulders. And the funny thing is I went into making this show going, this is totally bogus. And and then I realized, wait a second, it's like musical chills in a
Mhm.
different way. Well, like if music gives you chills, like that's kind of what an ASMR response is. But think of ASMR as something where you can just do it on demand. So I would encourage people like, if you're in the right environment and you have a very quiet thing and you're kind of watching these things and you're trying to feel something in the back of your neck, there's going to be, a lot of people who go, "Oh my goodness, I can do that." And I just don't know how our brain works. Is that something that was valuable to us 20, like a million
A
years
million years
ago?
ago? Yeah, a good
Or are we
question.
moving into that crossover sensory stuff? I don't know. It's
Yeah,
just fascinating.
I would love to see a study where they measure 60 and 70-year-old men and women, and then they measure 20 and 30-year-old men and women and see if any of the older folks even have this. Because they might be like, what the hell? Meanwhile, everybody who's been sitting in front of a screen for 3 decades is all
Yeah,
programmed. Our brains have all sort of grown roots into the machine, so to speak.
we just want like gentle things.
Right. Yeah. Oh God. For me, I can't. There's one particularly popular. There's tons of ASMR YouTubers, and they get millions of views. There was one I saw a story done on Vice by a friend of mine, and she's beautiful and she's very talented at what she does, and she seems like a very nice person. But her videos, when I see them, I just want to put my fist through the screen. And I keep thinking if I ever met her, I don't think I could have a normal conversation with her because she would immediately trigger me. I would just be like, I can't even look at your face. And again, she's like a beautiful, nice person, I'm sure. But I just can't deal with the feeling that I get from somebody whispering or eating noodles into a microphone. It just makes me
Some of
like
that's kind of
physically ill.
gross. So I
Yeah.
agree with that, but I will say that like I like that we're on the complete opposite sides of this because it's like a perfect example. Because like for me, when I think of ASMR videos, I'm thinking mega relaxation. Like I'm thinking, okay, it's gonna be like almost just like deep breathing for me. It's just like it's gonna like ground me. So what these ASMR artists are doing for people who are like that is a really big service. It's kind of like doing a Calm app or
Hmm.
something. I promise I'm not
Yeah. It's like
sponsored
a
by them.
guided meditation for somebody
It's
who's
almost like a
into it.
guided meditation. It's just like a gentle, it doesn't mean anything. It's just to like get you calm. And I really appreciate what ASMR artists are doing. But then with anything online, it can get real weird. Like there's this
Well,
we
yeah.
had somebody on our show, like there was just like eating pickles, like just to hear the snap of the pickles. But I
That
thought it
wouldn't
was kind
bother
of
me.
cool
I feel like
though.
that wouldn't bother me.
I just thought it was like, oh, that's so
Yeah,
satisfying.
yeah. That does sound satisfying. The whispering makes me, and the whispering in the small, it makes me want to be like, speak louder. Like I just like it's, again,
Yeah.
it's like an itch somewhere in my body or brain that I can't scratch because it's not really there.
Mouth sounds are really I think when
Ugh.
you are talking about smacking or noodles, that's when it's like, ugh, that's just kind of gross.
Yeah. Well,
So
my dad
again,
smacks
there's a
his lips when he
spectrum.
eats. Maybe that's why I hate it because it just
Could
reminds
be
me of that.
association.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Negative association. What? Speaking of sound and food, are there sounds that can make food taste differently or better? I that seems like that should exist.
Yeah, supposedly. So we've done a show on that too. So that is another synesthesia thing where we're trying to use something in hearing in order to cross over into food. And so Charles Spence is like the authority on this. But they've done all kinds of studies where they're playing different tracks of music. They've even done this in marketing to make like beer taste sweeter or more bitter. They've given people like chocolate with different tracks of music or soundscapes and kind of gauged the sweetness on it. And to me, I think there's a legitimate thing there because I think that for me, like music in like a fine dining situation is a very important thing. Music in like a super loud bar or something is different. It just doesn't. I don't know. It's not quite the sensory thing that I enjoy. But I think kind of ambiance is really important. And if you go into kind of fine dining, there's a very it's very important that they keep it very quiet, intimate between you and the person you're talking to, and usually something very light, possibly. But with food, yeah, there are restaurants that play certain things because they believe through studies that it makes things taste better. Um, I believe it. It may be very subtle. And I think with anything sensory, you have to realize that these are extraordinarily nuanced. And it's not something you're just going to have a Hershey bar put on this track and go, oh, it tastes different. It's like you
Hmm.
really have to like dig deep, try different things, and really, again, going back to the very beginning, open up that consciousness on hearing to be able to really kind of even determine if that's possible for you.
Looking at new devices like noise canceling headphones, which I really like, they create a bunch of different sounds probably that I can't hear that fight. Well, actually, how do those work? You probably know this.
Yeah, the simple answer is that there's a little microphone that's recording everything outside, and it's coming in, and it's instantaneously flipping the signal. So think about like what you would consider like a sine wave, or just for anybody who's like, have you ever seen just like audio waves? Like
Mhm.
think of audio waves in your brain. You think of something that goes, a line that goes up, and there's a line in the middle, and then that line crosses and it goes down, and then it comes back and meets in the middle. That's a sine wave. It's the most pure tone. So we're going to think about the sine wave. So what happens is if you're recording that sine wave, what happens in the noise canceling is immediately it's flipping the phase. So that's where um, it's generating an opposite signal to the signal that's coming in. So therefore, in theory, if you have a waveform going up and the same waveform going down, it cancels out to nothing. So that's, even if you've ever worked in audio or anything like that, if you just simply take a piece of audio, put another piece of audio, flip the phase on it, it will go to silence, even though it'll play in the DAW or whatever. But yeah, that's essentially how that works.
So if I'm canceling out a really loud sound, does that mean I'm just playing another really loud but opposite sound into my ear?
Yeah, there's a lot of debate on that. I've talked to Bose directly about that specific thing. The idea is that you still don't want to be slamming doors around noise canceling headphones, because what you'll hear is the noise canceling will fail. So a lot of times, like if I have headphones on and maybe I slam a door, you'll actually hear it disengage, and you'll kind of hear like just kind of a clicky digital thing, because it just can't keep up with that level of volume and the transient, because it's so fast. Is it doing a flip? I think that I'm not exact. It's so complex. I think it's happening inside like the mechanism.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessary. I think it's actually like doing a cancel out by the time it's hitting your ear.
Oh,
But
interesting.
at the same time, Bose and these companies would say you don't use these for hearing protection. So I'm sure there's a lot of nuance
Yeah.
to that.
Yeah. I love noise. And the reason I'm asking is I love these things. They've been a godsend because I'm one of those people who can't block things out very easily. And even with noise canceling headphones, I'll hear like my kid say something, which is probably a good thing for keeping kids alive, but it's a bad thing for focus and concentration, especially when my wife or a nanny or a babysitter or grandparent is there and they're fine. They're just
Yeah.
whining about gummy bears. So I love noise canceling headphones, but I also started to think, well, okay, I don't want to become reliant on these things. Like I have to be able to focus on my own at some point. I don't want to diminish that ability if that's a thing. And I've got a couple of friends of mine, they have to bring a white noise or fan sound device to hotels or they will not sleep. And if they move in with like a significant other, they'll bring a freaking giant 1979 fan that they bought and they've had for years, their whole
Oh, they
life
sound
pretty
so
much.
good.
They have to bring
Yeah.
it to that person's house because they can't sleep without this exact sort of fan tone all the time.
Yeah.
What's going
Yeah.
on there?
So yeah, on the fan side, that's something that's fascinating, because I also cannot sleep without white noise. What's actually happening here is it's that primal thing. So for me, so there's levels of sleep. You know, I think we all know that there's like kind of deep and REM, and there's kind of light sleep, and somewhere you're conscious, somewhere you're not. But there can be external factors that kind of pull you in and out of that sleep that affect that. And so, like if someone's cooking bacon in another, room, like your sense will kind of spark up a little bit. It's not going to ignore it because it's unnatural. So our senses kind of ignore things um, that is not valuable. But when we're vulnerable, think of us in the cave, or out in the woods. When we're vulnerable, the sense that's going to keep us most protected is going to be kind of amped up subconsciously. And so when we're sleeping, that sense is going to be hearing for the most part. I mean, of course, your other senses will be able to react if someone hits you or something.
Sure.
But hearing is kind of like a defense, it's a way to be able to like snap you out of it. So why I use white noise is because there's been so much bad sleep prior to that. And it's very much like if you're in your house, everything is just dead quiet and you hear a bang.
Hmm.
Your brain is so primitive that it's just going to jump right up and think the worst immediately, because you're in fight or flight mode at that moment. What may have happened is a dump truck may have just drove by and it just happened to slam something, or maybe your trash got picked up at night or something. So there's usually like a reasonable explanation, but once you get that rush of adrenaline and it's your life at stake, that's bad sleep. And there's different versions of that. So for me, I need to block all of that out. Some people are fine. Like I've kind of had this argument with people who live in New York City. Like for me, I'm from the South, I'm from the country, and for me, the sound of just nature and quiet is what comforts me. Yet, when people have kind of born and raised in New York City, they need that constant that
Huh.
calms them. A lot of people, which blows my mind. So for me, I cannot sleep if there's hubbub happening. And again, that could just be childhood, learned um, associations. So for me, I got to block all of it out. And white noise is every frequency happening that we can hear simultaneously, and so it's a masking effect. And that's what the general spirit of why white noise is important, very important to some people. So, yeah, my wife and I have had this debate many times, and
Oh God,
luckily
I can't even imagine if one person needs it quiet or loud and the other person needs kind of the opposite. You're in trouble.
like, she needs, TV going, and I cannot do
Oh,
it. But what she said is she doesn't watch news things, but there's a reason for that too. She said that the familiarity of it is a calming, comforting
sure.
aspect. So she was like, she'll just watch the same shows all the time. She knows what's happening. Her brain knows what's happening, and it kind of tunes it out. My brain does not work that way.
No, that would drive me crazy. The light alone would drive me crazy, and the
Oh
changing.
yeah.
I can't even think about sleeping in an environment like that. Why do things sound better when they're louder up to a point? My producer, Jason, is always getting on me about this. He's like, dude, you're turning yourself up. Stop adding bass to your voice in the podcast. I'm just removing it in post-production. Just stop doing that. But I can't. It sounds better up until the point where it's,
Right.
uncomfortably loud. But up until that point, it just sounds better louder. Why?
It's funny because we'll get these notes when we're doing trailers and ads and stuff where it's just like, turn that up. Now turn that up. Now turn the dialogue up. Turn the music up. Turn the sound effects up, all that. And at some point we're just like, we just literally turn the entire thing up. And it's
Yeah.
like, that sounds amazing. Um, Proximity effect is probably a big part of this. I have not studied that specifically. I experience it all the time. There's this thing called the Fletcher-Munson curve. Um, Essentially what's happening here is the world does not sound like how we perceive it. We are these animals that have these eardrums. Animals perceive sound in slightly different ways. A lot of crossover on that. So what happens is like we do not perceive all frequencies in a flat response. Like low frequencies need a lot of energy for us to hear it,
Hmm.
and high frequencies it starts to trail off too. The best example I can give is like a xylophone or like a marimba. You'll see that the low notes on the marimba have very long tubes. I mean that's for resonance, the length and all that stuff. And then it kind of goes up to short, and then it gets long again. That's also kind of representing how we hear and trying to get the marimba to speak in the way that we hear.
Is a marimba that's like a wooden xylophone with the pipes that stick out of the bottom?
Right.
Right. Okay.
Exactly. And
Okay.
it's kind of curved, but you see it curve at the bottom and at the top. And that's
Huh.
kind of an example of how our hearing hears the real world. So there could be very blaring high-pitched sounds that we don't perceive as high-pitched. There could be very blaring low-pitched sounds that we also don't perceive as loud. So that's that Fletcher-Munson curve idea, and that's what that is that's just basically how we hear. So when we come closer and we make things louder, we hear the highs and the sparkle, and we hear the lows more. And so that's something we're trying to accommodate for a lot. Like a lot of time when we pull music under dialogue, the first thing we lose because of this concept is the low frequencies. So a lot of times when we're pulling music under, we're boosting the low end because we
Mhm.
want to keep that perceived low end. That might be getting way too in the weeds,
It's a
but
little technical, but
Fletcher-Munson
it's
curve.
interesting because otherwise, how do you explain why things sound better or louder? It doesn't really.
Right.
It
Yeah.
shouldn't really necessarily be that way, especially given that we just talked about ASMR, which is a bunch of things that are so quiet that they make me angry and violent, right? So why? I guess for me, they really sound better louder. Slash, they only sound good at a certain volume, and below that, they're just irritating as all hell.
When we
Um,
really want to make it hard on us, our mixers or me will mix things at a very low volume and make sure we can hear every nuance of it. Because when we pull that up, it's just really consistent. It's not fun to mix things at a low volume because it's just you don't hear every little nuance. But when you crank that up, it just like it's a tool in the toolkit to like beef up kind of just the frequency range.
What do you think of deepfake sound? This is fresh on my mind because I just saw that Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, there was a
Hmm.
Russian deepfake of him saying, "Oh, we're surrendering, lay down your weapons, and the Russians are gonna, I don't know, take you prisoner, and it'll all be good and fine." And it didn't fool anyone because the Ukrainians have been seeing Russian disinformation for a really long time, and so has all of Eastern Europe for that matter. But they can do pretty impressive deepfake voices. the video's not going to be too much further away in terms of processing power and the ability to do that in the next few years in a convincing way. But these deepfake voices almost, I haven't seen what Adobe has said they have and shown what they have because they won't release it to the public, right? For a good reason, because it's just going to create all kinds of chaos. I did an episode on deepfakes with Nina Schick. It's episode 486. We mostly talked about video, right? Where I predicted that they were going to make a politician either say something that they would never say that's either racist or a big gaffe or a policy change. I didn't think they would have a president surrender in a war, but it's kind of the most obvious use for this kind of technology.
Mm-hmm.
But with vocals, it's really going to be hard to detect. Can we trust our ears now?
At this moment, maybe. So I did a show
Thanks.
on this, and the
Great.
whole thing that I wanted to make sure of is I said, I tasked the team and I was like, I want my voice for the first minute and a half to be as convincing as possible, but it's not me. And so to do that, we worked with one of the guests, and the guest even was very concerned about telling us exactly how it was done. Like, we never really got an answer of the actual ways it was done, but essentially he had said, send me 3 hours of your narration, just nothing else. And then I'm going to push it through some supercomputer, and it's going to do a lot of AI stuff and machine learning. And then that's going to kind of make this thing. And the more audio, the better, because there's just all this nuance. And it just takes, as far as I know, it just takes a long time to make it convincing. So we did that, fooled a lot of people with the intro not being me. And so that the experiment was like, can I convince people who've been listening to all of these shows that, like, I am not real?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it did a good job. The show is called Deepfake Dallas, so like you kind of are tipped off right off the bat. So I think that you can kind of get it. But if you didn't even look at the title, I think it's really convincing right off the bat. Even when we make episodes now, we put in a deepfake voice of me. That's through our software, to where we have a pacing, we have the words per minute, my cadence, all that stuff, to where we can build out this show. And then I can approach it as an outsider and then craft it before I actually come to it. So there's really interesting uses for deepfake like that. I would never use it on the show, but it's just like a tool to put me in the seat of the listener rather than me being the seat of the host, which is a different perspective. But will it get better? Yeah, it's gonna keep getting better. To the point, yeah, I haven't heard a lot of deep fakes that are super convincing yet. Where the pitfalls is in emotion, and I know that's the next frontier. Where when I'm speaking right now, I'm going up, I'm going down. Everything has meaning. I'm communicating meaning in the way that I'm singing my words to you.
If you say 3 children were killed in Odessa this morning, you don't want to say 3 children were killed in Odessa this morning, right? That would be horrible.
So that's like the difference between what the machine is doing now versus where it's trying to go. And can you get the machine to understand the context and emotion? I think that's kind of going to be the thing that makes that more convincing. And it will be able to pick out when in the source audio, when someone's like happy, or the quirks that they do. I mean, I have voice quirks, you have voice quirks that you just know are you. Yeah, so like the way that we sing our words is complex. And will it get better? Yeah, it will.
Yeah, to the point where it can be used against us, especially when you're talking about nation states. Like, I don't think a nation state like Russia or Iran or the United States would have any qualms about grabbing Adobe's software and being like, this is what we're going to do with this. We're going to make the Ayatollah say this horrible thing, and we're going to play it for everybody in Iran, and it's going to change it's going to change the political system over there in a way that that's desirable for us. Like, that is almost for sure already happening, but it's undetectable, or we're very close to that point, and we won't know until later that something is fake.
You know, one thing I find interesting is that social media and how much that is important to politicians now, I think is going to be a combating effect of that. You know, if you have the talking head in front of a podium, and that all of the communication comes from, the White House press room, you have a lot of data that you can make sound just like that.
Sure.
But when you have someone like Zelensky or whatever going out and just, showing him doing this and doing that and being in the world in just a, terrible, microphone on the phone or whatever, being more active, and that's going to be protection with deepfake, because that's going to be hard when you're trying to not only get the cadence right and all this stuff and edit. That's the other thing we forget about deepfakes. I'm a sound designer. I'm a sound editor. I can not only get a deep fake, but I could adjust it in ways and then edit it to make it exactly the way that I want. I mean, that's what we did in our show. We did a deep fake, but we did like 5 takes of deep fakes and still picked the best ones.
Right. So it's easier
So
to
there's a
just
lot.
do it right and real if you can. It's not going to,
Right.
it didn't save you time from recording your intro yourself, right?
So I think that like part of the way to combat that is putting yourself in situations where it's just not as easy to do that. Like if you're out in the open, if you're, you know, kind of social media style, like that's going to be detectable. There's a lot of complexities in the sound, like as in sound design, to not only deep fake the performance, but then also get the environments right. Because I think a lot of experts, even like me, I think I'd be able to pick out most if I really analyzed how it sounds.
Yeah, there's going to be a whole certification process for video that's been unaltered and is real. And you're going to have to, there's going to be almost like digital SSL certificates for this video is not, it's real people, it's real sounds, it hasn't been edited, it's been run through a supercomputer that can detect that kind of thing. And then we're going to have to figure out how to not have those forged all over the place. Man, what the chase is on, I suppose. The arms race for deep fakery in audio and video is quite something that we're going to see a lot in the next couple of decades here. Man, thank you so much. This is really interesting. From sound design to why things sound better loud to sonic branding. It's like a whole world that most of us have not thought of because it maybe comes in a little bit under our radar, so to speak.
Yeah, thanks. This was fun. And it was so nice to see that we're on 2 different sides of a hearing thing.
Of the ASMR thing? Yeah, well,
Of the ASMR.
I realize I'm the weirdo, but it doesn't make me feel any better when I hear somebody eating frickin' ramen into a shotgun mic. So
Yeah, I don't know. I've gotten a lot of reactions. And when we put the show out, it was just like, I hate this with all of my being.
yeah.
And then
yeah.
a lot of people were just like, oh, it's so satisfying.
Oh, I'm glad
Just
to hear
weird.
I'm not alone. Yeah. Well, to each his own, I suppose, when it comes to the sound landscape as well. Dallas Taylor, thank you so much, man.
Thank you.